I would receive phone calls every so often to say, "Hey, have you or your child fallen sick?" and so on and so forth. But there was really nothing beyond that. And in fact, I didn't know when the study completed. I didn't even know when the study got published. It was out of my own interest, and long after the problem ceased to be a problem. But when I had another young child at home, I went, looked, and found this publication. So I, as a participant in this clinical trial, felt completely devalued, despite the fact that it was my data. There was not even an acknowledgement, you know. So it made me wonder what as scientists and as clinicians, we think about the people who are actually in the clinical study. Much later, when I was more recently part of a medical device company, and we were designing clinical trials, first to test an rapid diagnostic test during COVID, and a medical device that measured various parameters. I had a chance to write informed consent forms along with the CRO. And it was then that I realized that we're so caught up in this sort of the scientific jargon and so on and so forth, that we don't even know how to write good consent forms, because everything we wrote was so complicated. And when it got translated, it got even worse. And it made me realize that we don't understand how we can, how to put the actual subject at the center of all of this. So this made me really very interested and excited about hosting today's event, and understanding patient engagement more, more deeply in the context of clinical trials. So there are multiple types of clinical trials, but the two main that we talk about typically are intervention studies and observational studies. And intervention studies is typically some sort of an intervention that the participants receive, and then you look at an endpoint. Whereas observational studies are really, assessing health outcomes based on certain types of behaviors or diets and so on and so forth, without any active intervention. And in the context of CDRI, we are always more closely thinking about interventional clinical trials, which, as you know, consists of multiple phases. Phase 1, 2, 3, where we test steadily in larger and larger groups of people for safety first, then efficacy, and then confirmation of efficacy. So when you look at what the sort of the global pharma industry benchmark for clinical development, it takes a long time and costs a lot of money, but it's also a huge attrition of compounds that go through the three phases of clinical development. So for every 100 drugs entering phase 1, about 60 advance to phase 2, 20 enter phase 3, and about 12 gain FDA approval. And the cost of the cost of developing a drug has been estimated, to be between 1.8 to 2 billion. And even if you dispute, and I do dispute this number, the bottom line is that the majority of the cost comes from clinical development. And that cost is compounded by the need to recruit certain type of patients, the availability of these patients, and where the trials are running. So when you look at clinical trials, the factors associated with the success are multifold, but rarely do we recognize that patient engagement is one of them. And by what we mean by patient engagement is that, how do we set the criteria? How do we recruit? How do we address concerns? Like, how do we write consent forms? How do we retain them? What is the burden on the patient? Do we look at all of these things when we are planning a clinical trial? And I would say that a success of a trial is crucially dependent on these factors, and perhaps we don't recognize that as much. And so on average, 80% of trials struggle with enrollment, and up to 30% of patients who join a clinical trial ultimately withdraw from the study. So as Vivek and others would tell you, every study that's planned, we assume that there'll be a certain percentage of dropouts. And why is that? It's because, for whatever reason, they're not engaged. So this is one side of the story. The other side of the story is, how many of us have ever participated in a clinical trial? Can I have a show of hands? 1, 2, 3. Three in this entire group. How many of you would like to participate in a clinical trial? Woohoo! Much larger numbers. I applaud you. I applaud you, and I at the same time point you to the difficulties. Why have you not been able to participate in a clinical trial? Even when you do, or you want to enroll a family member in a clinical trial, it is very difficult to do that. I also have seen that, with family and relatives who perhaps are, have a terminal disease diagnosis, and you want to get them into a trial. It's not easy. So these uh, the barriers to trial access are many, and we really need to address them so that the enrollment of people can happen from diverse communities, locations, and so on. So patient-centric clinical trials is really the core focus of today's event, and we want to prioritize the needs of patients at all times, and that's the message that we want to give, and that's really what we want to think more about today. And how do we improve patient engagement is that, we need to involve them in explaining clinical trial design, being present for them at all stages, ensuring compliance by, I mean, like in my own case, nobody was really paying attention, so that has to change. And community outreach to really demystify clinical trials, and then really getting, wanting to enroll a diversity of people in clinical studies and not be afraid of doing so. So focus on patient-centric care means we have to amplify awareness, we have to identify eligible patients more broadly, we have to get them to participate in decision making and in informed consent, uh, in a really authentic manner, and we have to facilitate administration of experimental therapy and monitoring using available technologies. And these are all themes that our speakers will talk about today. Finally, I want to say that ultimately patients' trust in clinical researchers plays a big role in their retention. And so those of us who have an interest in clinical research must remember that the science is facilitated by real people, and their needs must be kept first and at the forefront. Thank you very much. I'm now going to, I mean, you will hear from the other speakers on specific themes, and I encourage you to also, ask questions and get more involved in thinking about patient-centric clinical trials. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for enlightening us with the history of International Clinical Trials Day and sharing participants' point of view. Now I request Dr. Shruti to introduce Dr. Kavita Singh to assemblage.
It gives me immense pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest, Dr. Kavita Singh, Director of DNDi South Asia, to all of you. She has over 20 years of experience in biopharma, of industry, government, and even non-profit organizations. Madam holds MBBS degree and MD in microbiology. She also did executive program in business management and postgraduate diploma in epidemiology. Most recently, she served as mission director of BIRAC's National Biopharma Mission. Dr. Singh was the director of Multi-Vaccine Development Program. This was the collaborative effort of various organizations, including DBT, Ministry of S&T, ICGB, PATH, the Malaria Vaccine Initiative of USA. So the objective of this collaboration was to accelerate the translational development of malaria vaccines that are being developed in the academic institutions. So during her tenure, the team not only successfully completed the technology transfer from academia to industry, but also did the regulatory filing and conducted two phase 1 clinical trials of first in human vaccine trial of the recombinant malaria vaccine candidates. So, in her long stint of the private sector, Dr. Singh has played multiple key roles, either as director or the team lead or head of the medical affairs in major private sectors that includes Ranboxy, Fortis Clinical Research Limited, and Shanta Biotechnics, and so on. So, apart from being very successful at the work front, she herself has been very adventurous. She completed 50-day road trip from India to London. This is very interesting, ma'am. And such an interesting and impossibly talented guest is here with us today to deliver a lecture on DNDi and patient engagement. I welcome you to the podium.
Director CDRI, Dr. Radha, Dr. Shrivastava, Dr. Sharad Sharma, uh, dear colleagues, dear friends, some of them I've met before in my previous visit a couple of months back, and the lovely students sitting behind. A very good morning, and thank you so much for your excitement and this vibrancy to talk about clinical trials in a research institute, which of course does clinical trials, but the heart of much of the research, clinical research, comes from institutes like this. And thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's very humbling. But I saw that the claps came in from the 50 days drive. So I mean that's nice. Even I enjoy that part of my life, and I do it very often. But taking the opportunity today, I'll thank Dr. Radha again, because it's only we do things when we are together, and that's somehow a message I keep talking about in every conversation I make. That's a message I gave yesterday also when Dr. Radha and I were together at BITS Goa, and that's extremely, extremely critical. And the most important part of that whole engagement is the patient. And we'll talk. We had the option today of what is it we should keep. What is it when we're discussing internally, Manisha, with my colleague, what is it we should be talking today? I knew we had wonderful experts, Dr. Shrivastava, Dr. Pooja, I believe she's online, would be talking about real technical concepts. So we said, let's do something different. We as an organization for the last 10 years have been doing clinical trials for one disease, Kala-Azar, visceral leishmaniasis. I'm sure all of you are aware of it, in the state of Bihar. And the team which were doing it, somehow we had never recorded, for their versions and their engagement with the patient whom were a part of our studies. So what we've done is we've recorded, you will see some direct quotes, some understandings, broad understandings. What these, when you hear from them, these are the learnings you inculcate in yourself or in your future work. So many of you, I am hoping, will go ahead to be part of you're taking your own molecules forward, be a part. And even if you're a discoverer, you continue to stay engaged with when your molecule is going forward with clinical trial experts or clinical trialists or socialists who design the clinical trial, and keep, if possible, just keep this in your mind, these few pointers which are very critical. It is science on one side, but it's sociology, human nature, human engagement on the other side. And I rather thank you so much for sharing that wonderful experience. That how do you feel when you're a part of half of the journey and not the remaining? And even when you're half a part of that journey, are your points of comfort, are they taken care of or not? So that's a background I wanted to give before I start off. And maybe I'll just take a minute that even though, this organization, DNDi, if you see, the origin of this organization was actually formed for a patient. 20 years back, I'm sure many of you are aware of, Doctors Without Borders as an organization. They were physicians who were treating patients in conflict zones or really areas which did not have medical care. And they realized that they don't have drugs to treat their patients. You have either toxic drugs or you have drugs which have become resistant over time, or you don't even have drugs for some diseases. So, and you realize that pharma companies will never invest in making these drugs because they will never get the return on investment, because these drugs only cause diseases in areas which do not have the ability to pay. So first time I would have, there are not many times physicians say, okay, if nobody is doing it for me, I'll do it myself. It's not a trait you will see very often in physicians. But here is a group of them who came together, formed this organization, and it's 20 years since then. And I'll not talk, my intent is not to talk about more about this as an organization, but the message again I'm giving is that even if an organization is formed for the patient, somewhere I don't think we do go the last mile, which is really important. And you will really understand this when you hear that there is so much more a patient engagement can add value during, not only during clinical trials, but even when you're developing your target product profiles. Sometimes we write in a target profile, this is the endpoint, or this is something the drug should be taking, curing the patient. But maybe the problem of the patient is something else. When we do a trial, we'll say, okay, did the swelling decrease? But maybe for the patient, swelling is not the problem. For the patient, maybe it is pain is the problem. For patient, maybe disability is the problem. And we don't even capture it in our clinical trials. So as early we start engaging, and especially in our country where we are looking for diseases which impact our population much more, because we know many people are not working for their diseases, for their treatments, these insights really will help you a long way. So I've given most of it as a context that globally and in India, cities, we all know clinical trials are usually done in cities, in tier 1 cities, even now a little bit we see in tier 2 cities. So the infrastructure, the capacity you get there is going to be very different from what when sort of DNDi started doing Kala-Azar treatments in leishmaniasis in Bihar. And I will not again, for the sake of time, interest of time, I will not again go, but I'm hoping you all are aware of this disease, which if not treated, I think this is fatal. This is the most important message. And the second is it also has a sequelae in many patients. In India, it's less. I was in Nepal last week, and they were saying about 30 to 40% of their patients, have PKDL. It's a very large population who have PKDL. India, it is little lesser. We have, over the years, we are very proud of the way India has tackled these public health problems. Our numbers have really come down. And again, it is a very, lots of ministries, lot of people, lot of trialists, lot of physicians who came together to do that. But my main topic, which I want to speak, and I want to share the learnings which my team has shared with me, is about the reflections on the conduct of trials in Kala-Azar patients of Bihar. And, we sort of, just to give them more context, we'll talk about what are those differences in the trial site. What is that local sociological context? What are the challenges of those population? And if some of the, how does our team sort of overcome some, not even overcome, at least address them as they went along. So this slide is also to remind ourselves, many people who do trial will understand this slide immediately. And if you have not done trials, this is one of the most critical part. It's like a Bible. Within the Bible, this is the soul of the protocol, the clinical trial protocol. It defines and I've just taken, half part of it. This was just because I had a message to give here. You would see the type of activities which need to be done and the number of days. So, from -7 day, every day you need to do some activity. And this is a study which was for 6 months. If you have a study like PKDL, you will do it for 2 years. And you are continuing to engage with the patient all along. Sometimes you're doing a clinical chemistry, hematology, you're doing an ECG, you're doing assessments. You are even in our phase 2 trial, which we are doing for an oral molecule for VL, we are multiple times doing bone marrow aspirations, because the evidence you generate here will guide the patient with treatment. You can't do those when it becomes a part of the daily prescription of physicians. So that's why the trials have to be intensive. It does not matter whether they're having in US or India. We cannot compromise on the science which goes behind a clinical trial protocol. So you can imagine this protocol can be done in Delhi, and this is being done in a small primary health center of Bihar. So how do you balance it out? Certainly, you will not compromise on here, that's for sure. So what happens when you really go into real life, doing the trials? These are the primary health centers. So naturally, because as when you're a sponsor of a trial, you have to repeatedly visit this trial site to monitor the data, to monitor your the real data time capture. How is it getting captured? How it's getting transcribed? You would rather mention informed consent. You want to go and check, are the informed consent being signed? Are they rightly signed? There's so many responsibilities. So it means as a even if you okay, the patients are traveling locally, but the sponsors are traveling, and there's a connectivity issues. We all know that our primary health centers, our district hospitals are not appropriately staffed. And naturally, their primary responsibility is the care of the patient. Their primary responsibility is not clinical research. So you have these people, and still, if you see them happening, it means you see the sort of commitment these physicians have. A good clinical practice, which is an integral part of any trial, like good documentation practices, and I'm sure you all understand GMP, so you all can relate to GCP also, and the infrastructures. These PHCs and these district hospitals are have a very basic minimalistic capacity. In addition to the capacity of the site, you have a population which is whose vulnerability you need to. I'll talk a little more about the vulnerability, whose culture you need to understand, and especially for a country of ours where culture between states will differ, right? Our language will differ. I need to understand what are the local practices, right? You can put in your protocol, I want a subject who only has history of 2 to 3 weeks. But maybe that's not the practice in that society. For 2 to 3 weeks, for 4 weeks, they'll continue to go to everybody else but a physician to get themselves examined. So how would you even recruit a patient, and your protocol inclusion criteria first line is only 20 days of history, because you know if it is later, the patient would be more complicated and you don't want to risk the drug not getting tested in the right population. By vulnerability, I said I'll talk a little more. We need to remind ourselves that, especially because we were working in Kala Azar, so it's not true to every disease. This is very specific to Kala Azar. These patients are very poor. You know, they come from castes which have always been neglected. They don't demand for their rights. They're not much aware. So how do you ensure they are not exploited? How do you ensure that? One of our senior managers, we were speaking to him, he said that it was, of course, the same point which I was making. You know, when does it onset? When do they start getting treatment? When do they reach a physician? And also sometimes, you know, the national data, I mean, I shouldn't say it on the stage, but the national data, and when you really go to the site is very different, right? There's hotspots which are sometimes missed, or there are spots which are mentioned. So you really need to do fact finding yourself. That are we at the right place? Are we? Will I have my patient here whom I'm looking for? Then if you remember, I showed you that chart, right? You have to follow up these patients. There is no other option but in a clinical trial to follow up and get your end results. But for 2 years, can it be done? It is costly for the patients from villages to come to the trial site. And if you have women participating, if you have children participating, you will see all of them come together, right? A family will never allow a woman to travel alone for her clinical end examinations or points. They will not send their children alone. So it means the whole family travels. It means you got to make arrangements not only for there, and the whole family also loses wages. And the other thing is, you know, when a patient is sick, when he's acutely sick, when they will come to hospital, they will understand they need to be followed up. But why do you need to follow me up for 6 months? I am fine. I'm healthy. I don't have any symptoms. But you need to know, you know, is there something happening in his? You need to do the safety profiling of the drug. You need to know, is there any impact on the hematology, biochemistry, or is there any relapse? Is there any recurrence? Is there any other adverse event or any other loss of efficacy which you're missing out? That's what they say. Our coordinator said that they think it's a waste of their time. I've already sort of linked, you know, hinted towards this. These are patriarchal society. Women do not take medical decisions on their own. And our coordinator says that women do not even talk to me if we do not have the approvals from their husbands or families. And it is difficult to convince her to join the trial. And I also need to worry, you know, if the husband is not here and the coordinator goes and knocks at the door, what would her neighbors say to her? Why was she seeing somebody visiting her house? These are actual issues, right? We all relate to them. An American, would not be able to relate to them, but we as Indians, we relate to these issues. A very big, you know, this came out very strongly when we were doing the PKDL study. So PKDL, like I just mentioned, is a fallout of if you've had a prior history of VL. So if a woman is recently married into a family and she has PKDL, And if somehow the family comes to know that prior to marriage she had this disease, you can imagine the sort of stigma that will carry, that she was a sick woman who came into her house. Actual problems of life. So this privacy, which was a very that, because this patient was actually recruited, and the ensuring that her family doesn't come to know of a prior, her in-laws family do not come to know of her prior history of VL, had to be respected and in fact maintained. Then this with Bihar, another issue is men go away from, they all move out of Bihar for majority of the months, right? So how do you do the follow up? So our coordinator used to really have a calendar of festivals, local festivals, when they would come and just jump upon them that, okay, you're home now, let's go for a follow up. And these are the sort of visuals you would see. The coordinator would need to travel because some sites which were actually had lots of patients. So this is a place called Raghopur in Vaishali district, and Vaishali PHC is where we had done the study. One of the trial sites, and the waters he used to say was very choppy, and he often felt he's not coming back this time. And I'll show you his photo. Rajkishorji's, his name is Rajkishorji. He's really the heart of this whole work we've done in Bihar. The other thing he told us is that I really need, even within between villages, that some of them offer tea, some of them are happy to have him in. And if he refuses to have tea with them, again, it's a mark of disrespect. So knowing the nuances, the local nuances of the point, and he says these gestures of mine were appreciated. And this is, he also said it's all about human relationship. Forget the clinical trial. Clinical trial is just an output, Basically, what he's doing is building human relationships. And what all he would say, I would use a local dialect, ensure, I've already said that, maintaining the privacy. Okay, I think we've talked about it, most of it. The other things we also do is, of course, this you do even in villages, and this you also do in the cities, is have these camps, health camps for the people. So what we did it even much before the trial started working with doctors at the district and community levels, and we have this rapid, especially because naturally our desire was Kala-Azar patients. So we did that extra mile of let's do RK39, let's sort of know what the local epidemiology circulation is. And for PKDL, because it needs a skin biopsy, it needs a very specific diagnostic. I know you really have to understand. I need to understand the microscopy expertise. So these patients had to be brought to RMRI, which is an ICMR institute. The other thing which you told us, that and he's Rajkishorji, just to show you. He says, I work with ASHA workers very closely. And the reason is because we all know ASHA workers who were in fact also nominated for a prize, were given an award by WHO last year for their efforts towards the World Health, being the frontline work health force. They say because they're always from the local village, the ASHA worker. He says, if I work with them and people trust them, people trust me. So you find ways to how do you integrate yourself into the local society. We do a lot of work, try to meet the political leaders also always to stress upon them on doing trials for a vector-borne disease. And when you work with the leaders ensure that they pass on the message to the community. And because we also, you would have seen, I didn't mention it, but ICMR is a founder member of DNDi 20 years back and is still on the DNDi board. So we also, because ICMR, RMRI, we work with RMRI Institute in Patna. We say, we are a part of the government. So we use all right words to give them the confidence. We are not here to exploit, that's a message. And sometimes Rajkishorji said that he also because we've done trials, or we've done 3 trials back to back over the last 10 years. So the older people, some other people who would have participated in our trials also act as a brand ambassadors. Much of it is a similar message. So I will. So like he told me last time when I was visiting Bihar. He says, even if they fall sick because of any other disease, they call him up. Or if that government to patients of Kala-Azar, government gives some financial to take care of their nutrition. So from where will they get their financial money? Whom to approach? What is the government mechanism? We all know it's complex. They call him up because for them, he knows much more than the ASHA worker. ASHA worker has to work on 70 more diseases. He's really the guy for them for Kala-Azar. And so, look, this was important sentence he makes, while his wife jokes that I go around solving other people's problems and should keep some time for solving the family problem too. He's so enraged. This is standard, the infrastructure sometimes really, there were so many institutes, hospitals where patients, even the staff do not get access to clean water, beds, cabinets. So all this becomes a part of, it has to be silently done. This is not something you showcase and give, but they are all silently done so that the people, the staff over there, the constant training, and they said, one of my team members said there was such a big learning exercise on, because most of the people who do clinical trials, many of them don't come from medical background. So how do you communicate in a language which is equally respectful to a doctor or to the healthcare staff, and be a local dialect? And to tell them that this is not going right, this needs to be corrected. That itself is a learning curve. You cannot expect somebody to start from day one to become a clinical trial monitor also. No, this is a learning you go through. And actually, I'm telling you, if you send somebody from Quintiles, you send somebody from Icon, they will never, none of them ever work in, they cannot work in this environment. Novartis is working with us because they know they cannot do a trial in India without, these expertise. So I want to conclude. I want to say that um, conducting clinical trials among underserved communities is necessary. It is critical. It's required. It should be done. It requires strong commitment from the sponsors, the strong empathy from the sponsors. Uh, it is a slow process, but it gives rich dividends. And maybe sometime Dr. Radha, I can share that movie if you can circulating for the sleeping sickness, and we have a similar one for leishmania. The satisfaction it gives you when you see a patient or you're getting recovered from diseases. And just leave you with this, that have your own principles for patient engagement. And diversity is a very critical part of it. We always forget, and I will not go into deep, but we forget what it to do trials in females. We forget to do trials in pregnant women, in small population, in pediatric population, because it's a very different. We don't want, many pharma companies don't want to open that Pandora box. It's very different. The sort of preclinical data you need to do studies in this group is very different. And that's again an investment we don't want to make, but that's not the topic for the day. But certainly, I'm saying DNDi, which was centered around patient engagement, still realizes there's just so much to be done. We don't involve them in when we were making a protocol, but it's a learning which we are happy to do and happy to be engaged in as we go forward. So thank you so much for your time and for the claps for Rajkishore. I'll pass them on.
Very mesmerizing work. Thank you, ma'am, for sharing with us the overview of DNDi, also for enlightening us with the idea of patient engagement in clinical trials. And a big round of applause for Rajkishore ji. Now I invite Dr. Shruti to introduce Dr. J.S. Srivastav.
JSR is actually a very familiar person to many of the faculty here in CDRI because his association with the institute dates back to 1986. So he superannuated as chief scientist from the Division of Clinical and Experimental Medicine. At present, he is the professor and head of the Department of Psychiatry, Hind Institute of Medical Sciences, Lucknow. So he has 29 long years of involvement in CDRI in developing protocol, design, conduct, and assessment of clinical trials from phase 1 to phase 3. And he has submitted multiple dossiers to the CGI. He was the active member of the drug development group that enlist Cent-Propazine, Memory Plus, Artether, Cent-Chroman, and anti-malarial CDRI compound 97/78 in clinical research collaboration with KGMU and PGIMR Chandigarh. So during his time in CDRI, he also organized an iconic symposium on the theme of protecting human participants in clinical trials. So he has been ethics committee member of many fine hospitals that includes KGMU, SGPGI, Apollo Medics, and the chairman of ethical committee of Midland Hospitals, AIMS Raebareli, and he was the member of subcommittee on ethics review procedures of to revise the ethical guidelines of biomedical research on human participants. He has high impact articles in national as well as international peer reviewed journals to his credit, and he's the recipient of multiple prestigious awards and recognitions. The list is very long. Just to name a few: INSA JSPS, that is Japan Society for Promotion of Science, for clinical pharmacology in Japan, and the Fogarty Fellowship of Joint Center of Bioethics from University of Toronto, and he was also been the elected member of DSMB, that is Data Safety Management Board. Today he will be delivering lecture on patient-centric approach for clinical trials. It's an honor to have you here with us, sir. I humbly welcome you on the podium.
I feel very honored to come here to CDRI, where I have worked for, as mentioned in my introduction, that I worked here for 29 and a half years. So sometimes I feel actually I'm feeling very nostalgic at particular moment at this moment. So I participated in so many clinical trials. I'm so grateful to Dr. Radha, Dr. Director here, and the team headed by Dr. Sharad Sharma, Dr. Manisha Sharma from DNDi. So, although my task has been made easier, much easier by the director herself and Dr. Kavita Singh, who gave a very beautiful example of how the patient should be engaged in a clinical trial. And IEC coordinator, I think this is Institutional Ethics Committee. You mean IEC coordinator? The Information Education Commission. Okay, but actually, what I have been member in so many ethics committees that they also call it IEC, the Institutional Ethics Committee. That is what we have named in ICMR guidelines. So I was part of the latest revision of ICMR ethical guidelines. So I think I would like to go to the first slide. I just wanted to introduce to the clinical trials. Actually, the clinical trials, what we have been doing so far, have been mainly site-centric, or they were mainly centric to the central to the disease process. And now the shift is not only for the clinical research, even for the healthcare, the shift is from site-centric to patient-centric. And that is what is required. So what change actually has occurred during in the procedures of clinical trial? The conduct of clinical trials has evolved over the last 1 century to improve the unbiased evaluation of new therapy, and randomized controlled trial was a gold standard, is still a gold standard, but there remain several limitations in the current clinical trial paradigm, and they are often site-centering, requiring patients to come to the clinical site for sample and data collection. That is the biggest problem. So the rapidly advancing field of digital health technologies provides a great opportunity to radically transform the way clinical trials are conducted, and it is shifting to clinical trial paradigm from a site-centric to a patient-centric. But how we are going to do it? Types of clinical trial that involve the patient centricity, that they focus on involving patients in their own health care management, and typically through a limited number of sub-sites that are coordinated by a central study coordination center, and thereby for in data collection as well. What happened is in 2013, Robbins et al. Actually examined the patient centricity concept and described how the patient centricity definition is broader than the context of clinical trial. It is not confined to the clinical trial only. Patient centricity is a dynamic process through which the patient regulates the flow of information via multiple pathways to his investigator or his healthcare personnel with his preferences, values, and beliefs. So, how we can achieve this clinical patient centricity? One way is decentralizing the clinical trial, and in decentralizing clinical trial, there can be fully centralized, what we have been doing so far. And now the concept is going towards the fully decentralized, which is still very difficult to fully decentralize. So in between, this is a hybrid type of clinical trial. If the complex clinical trial procedures are involved, then the fully centralized is much better as compared to fully decentralized. But if the less complexity there in trial procedures, they can be done in hybrid trial, usually hybrid trial, or the fully centralized. These are the two main methods which are being carried out so far. And fully decentralized is the future of the clinical trial. And what are the key aspects of patient centricity in the decentralization of the clinical trial? And decentralized clinical trials often involve selecting various sites, including local healthcare facilities, even patients' homes, or as study locations or subsites. The goal is to minimize the burden on the patient, as discussed by Dr. Kavita before. In the patients have to come to the site. So that is the basic purpose why we want to minimize the burden on the patient by conducting the study visits closer to where they live. Although it will be very difficult, I think, in our country, because where the health staff is short and is not so well trained as in other countries, in developing countries. So remote monitoring and data collection is being suggested, and technology will play a crucial role in such trials. Patients may use wearable devices, mobile apps, or telemedicine platforms to collect and transmit study data. This reduces the need for frequent in-person visit, making participation more convenient for the patients. So that is the basic objective of the patient-centric clinical trial. Another concept is of e-diary, and e-diary is a short form for the electronic diary, and is a digital. I think it's Short for electronic diary is a digital version of the traditional diary. In this context, an e-diary refers to digital tool or application used to collect patient-reported outcomes or patient-reported data in a decentralized manner. And some key features are that there is remote data collection, patient engagement, time-stamped entries can be done, and real-time monitoring as well as the data integration with other. Then this is a very important thing which and but will be very complicated when we are going to implement in our country, because e-consent, the concept of e-consent is one of the toughest consent, because as ethics committee member, I have felt the taking consent is one of the most difficult aspect. Preparing the patient information document has been one of the I think we have been trying to. I think I'm a member here also in the CDRI ethics committee. So here also I have felt many times that the patient informed sheet has to be improved. So if we are doing e-consent, then this has to be we have to be very careful when we are providing the information to the subjects. So this is a system that obtains informed consent from a research subject or their legally authorized representative. The information is presented via the computers, that is envisaged that it will be done in that way. Then the ethics committee will have to work harder to go through these formats. And the digital format makes it easier to educate subjects. It is easy to make them educate, but in our country where the most of the population is still illiterate, it will be very difficult how we are going to do it through the text, graphics, audio, video, passive and interactive websites. All these terms have been listed here, but when we will apply them, then we will see what shortcomings we will have. But the benefits of electronic consent is the convenience of not having to go to a research site. Ability to review the consent form without feeling pressure to sign right away. That is one of very important point when nowadays what in the paper form, when the consent form is presented, the patient has a pressure to sign it either immediately or after. Now gradually we are teaching in ethics committee that you should give time to the subject to think over it, give the patient information sheet to the subject so that he or she can go through it and then sign it. So that is the electronic consent gives an ability to review the consent form without feeling pressure to sign right away. And the opportunity is there to be better informed. And there is an option to review the supplemental information as well, because the hyperlinks can be given in the electronic consent form. And then the signature part, then the signature can be given by stylus or by the fingerprint. Then as was mentioned by the director, that we have to amplify the patient centricity. How do we amplify it? Incorporating the patient centricity into the clinical trials, researchers can enhance patient recruitment and retention and improve the data quality and increase the relevance and applicability of these study findings. But how to amplify the patient centricity? That will be the issue which has to be seen when we are going into these kind of trials. Ultimately, this approach may foster a more patient-centered research environment that respects the needs and preferences of the individuals. Now, the another point here is the reducing the site burden. Most of the time, these site-centric trials, the sites are excessively burdened. So what we can do in traditional trial layout, all assessments are performed on one site. And many challenges are can be seen here. There is slow participant recruitment. It is difficult to recruit patient easily because the patient has to come to this site, and the retention is also low. The patient dropout rate becomes high. The burden of the trial related visits to the investigative site, because the patient may or may not be able to come to the site as frequently as we want. And that makes the cost of the clinical trial go high. And if the patient doesn't come, it will impact on the trial results. So, but if we are able to implement the digital health technology, then I think it will be possible to recruit, assess, and monitor trial participants without them having to leave their local homes or their local healthcare environment. That is expected. But what will happen, that has to be seen. And most decentralized clinical trials, as I mentioned earlier, also they are hybrid trials that include some aspects of both digitally enabled and decentralized approaches. We cannot, the level of decentralization actually will depend on possibility or practicability of whether the patient subject for the patient and the investigational product, how the investigational product has to be delivered. That is also one of the criteria, how whether we can decentralize or we can send the drug material, or we have to call the subject to be given parenterally or in some other way. So, and another very important point is that the country in which the trial is taking place, an individual country legislation will also determine whether we can do hybrid or fully decentralized clinical trial. I think the DCGI still is not very clear about this because they are not going to allow these decentralized clinical trials. So we have to be very careful when we are adopting technology. But I think FDA has given guidance. Draft guidance has been issued last week only. So they have their thinking is that the decentralization should be done, but they are expecting the hybrid type much better as compared to fully decentralized. That is their thinking. But how the Drug Controller General of India takes it, I think we have to see it. And then the improving the data accuracy is another way, and is we can do the in these decentralized clinical trials. When it comes to trial, whether it is a traditional trial or it is a decentralized trial, the three core tenets remain same. Here, the accessibility, use of technology has to be as easy as possible. And it should be easy to learn for these subjects also. And technology is most effective in clinical trials when it fits into patients' daily routines and is accessible on devices that are already the subject is familiar and they already have it. Then the simplicity, as I mentioned earlier also, that it task for the patient has to be kept as simple as possible. If what is required of them is too complex, this will not only cause the stress for the subject, but there will be more chances of the error. And then we have to be very careful when we are generating data on these, whether traditional or in the DCT, these trials. Make sure your tools and processes have been thoroughly tested and validated. That will be the most difficult part, whether they have been validated or not. As the trial progresses, patient feedback can improve the processes, but how will they do it? And how will they increase the reliability, whether they will be able to make amendment once the trial has been finalized? So how will they do it? That has to be seen. And finally, the more and better real world data is much better for the patient uh, care also, and in the finally for the pharma company as well. Real world data relates to patient health status and or delivery of the healthcare routinely collected from a variety of sources, especially in the phase 4 clinical trial when the drug has been marketed and it is being used concomitantly with other medicines as well. So that is the clinical evidence which will be generated by using this data, and potential benefits or risks of the this medicinal product will be derived from this real world data. So I would like to conclude my trial with saying that a fully decentralized or hybrid clinical trials with patient centricity may positively impact clinical trial development in numerous ways. That is what I can say at present, unless we see it it happening in the reality. Accelerating the patient recruitment, increasing the patient diversity, which I think Dr. Kavita also mentioned in her talk, how to include the diverse number of patient or diversity we included in the subjects. Patients become more knowledgeable, informed, and engaged if we use this technology. We can improve reliability and accuracy of data only when we see how it will happen. The reporting will become easier and analysis of the results will also be easy. I think with that, I think my two MD students from Hind Institute, I will acknowledge to them because they have done the untiring and skillful help in preparing this presentation. And with that, I would like to thank you. I think but finally, I'll say that I think the example which you have given, the IEC coordinator, which I was thinking it was ethics committee coordinator. The ethics committee does not have the responsibility only to approve the trial. That is what I have I have published a paper in current science journal, that the responsibility of ethics committee does not end with the approval of the project. It continues with the monitoring. Unless you are monitoring it, how it is being done. So that is Mr. Raj Kishore. I think he will become famous, I think, with Dr. Kavita's presentation at many places. So we should have a coordinator, such coordinator in almost every trial. Unless the trial coordinator is directly engaging with the subject, I think these methodologies will never be able to replace such people. I think ethics committees have to be very careful when they are approving the data, approving a clinical trial, whether such a person exists in that particular trial. DSMB, I have been to Harvard for DSMB training also, and their data safety monitoring board, they are setting up in most of the clinical trial. That is what multi-center regional trial center has envisaged. But I think that is not a reality in India as so far. I think, but I hope, now it is compulsory, but it's still not being done in India. It will happen, I think, I hope so. Still, the ethics committees are not able to function so well. That is because I am seeing throughout, I think it's SGPGI, KGMU, I think maybe AIMS Raebareli also. We have to be very careful when we are approving the clinical trial, because the consent forms are in learning phases. With that, I will thank Director and Dr. Sharad and Dr. Manisha and Dr. Kavita Singh. Of course, she is, I think, Director of the DNDi. So I will thank everyone and every person present here. I think most of you may not be knowing me, but some of you may be knowing me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for educating us about new trends and approaches in patient-centric trials, do's and don'ts. Our next speaker is Dr. Pooja Sharma. She is joining online. She is founder and CEO of APAR Health. She is a well-published gynecologist and researcher with 25 years of experience in planning, management, and overview of clinical research. She was the founder director of Medanta Institute of Education and Research. Prior to Medanta, she had worked in AIMS Delhi and Society for Applied Sciences as a senior scientist. She is ethics committee chairperson of several distinguished organizations and has in-depth understanding of regulatory and ethical issues in clinical research. She has been awarded the Exemplary Contribution Award by the BHU Medical Association. She is a strong advocate for patient participation in research and supports capacity building in clinical research through her new startup, APAR Health. We will be privileged to hear from you, ma'am, about patient engagement, putting patients first. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I hope I am audible to everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Radha Rangarajan, Dr. Kavita Singh, Dr. Manisha Sharma, respected faculty on the dais, and dear audience. It's a tough task to follow such exemplary speakers. I hope I am audible. Will somebody indicate that I am audible and that you can see my screen?
Yes, ma'am, you are very well audible.
Okay, thank you so much. So two critical messages that I have taken from Dr. Radha's talk are really wonderful starts to my conversation with you. One is talking about practical reasons for patient engagement and retention of patients, and actually decreasing dropouts in clinical trials or clinical research is one of them. And the second one is even more interesting, that she shared a personal story, and I would love to share a personal one with you as well, is that the story changes when you are at the receiving end. So I'm a gynecologist by training, and we have a certain attitude. We learn a certain way of conversation, sadly. It totally changed when I underwent my first cesarean section. So it was a totally different story after that. So yes, if you are at the receiving end, things do change. And the same thing as a researcher, when I participated in my first clinical trial, there was a trial for a metabolic syndrome kind of a disease study. My attitude towards participants totally changed. And as a principal investigator, I definitely became much more aware of what all they have gone through to actually participate in that study. So since then, I've participated in 4 clinical trials, and I hope to continue to keep participating because it sort of keeps me on my toes, keeps me engaged. Is my slides now visible to you? Are my slides visible, ma'am?
No, ma'am, not yet.
Not yet. Can you see them now?
No, ma'am, not yet.
Not yet. So maybe I go to entire screen.
You can share the screen.
I am trying to, it doesn't allow me to share the screen. It's saying cancel. Just give me a second, please. Can you see it now?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Not full screen.
Okay, is it full screen now?
Not yet.
It says full screen. It is showing full screen now. It's still not showing full screen?
Ma'am, you can start first.
Okay.
It will come.
Okay, so today I'm going to talk with you about incorporating the patient voice in clinical research. So the speakers before me have spoken about the need. I don't need to emphasize, but I just like to mention a little bit. India is definitely the world's most populous country, now a leading economy. And the need for medical research and innovative treatment for our patients is not just appealing, but it is now essential. We need high quality patient care, and we need it through evidence-based medicine. This evidence will come through patients, and it's not too much to expect that patients, who are a very critical part of this evidence generation, understand what research is and how useful it is for them, and thus engage proactively in research. We've all read about patient centricity, and we've heard about it, and we've been speaking about it for several years. But there is an immense difference between what clinicians think, and as has been said by speakers before me. There is a human part to the concept, which even Dr. Kavita has emphasized, and Dr. Radha as well. And there is the clinical part, so that there is a very, as training goes, medical doctors become a little more clinical and a little more distant, right? Then there's a very important part of communication. Now, this is a Time magazine cover, which has bothered me no end for years. And this is something that started me on my journey to actually say that, how patients should feel positively towards clinical research, right? So this is something that started my journey. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and, he and I were speaking. He's a lawyer, and I was telling him, you guys have such difficult legalese.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes,
the slides are not moving.
The slides are not moving. Okay.
Ma'am, kindly disconnect yourself and rejoin it.
Okay, I shall do that.
Okay, sometimes.
Now it's fine. Now
yes, it's fine now.
It's fine now.
Just cancel it. Just cancel. Just ma'am, click on F5.
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 And can you see it move now?
No, ma'am.
So I have clicked F5.
Now it's fine. You can continue, please.
Yes.
I'll continue like this?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not, but it's fine. We can see it clearly.
Yeah,
okay,
just click on F5 or slideshow. Go to slideshow.
I went to slideshow and then it disappears for you.
Okay.
This is slideshow for me now. Is it slideshow for you?
No, ma'am. Actually, at the top you can see slideshow option.
Okay. It is saying Teams is sharing a window. Doesn't show a slideshow.
Yeah, window. Yes, just click on window, ma'am. Just click on window. No, I think you have unshared it, sir. Share it again, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, now click on F5, ma'am, if possible.
I will. F5. Is it showing as a screen share?
Actually, it's for full screen.
It's showing full screen?
No, ma'am. Actually,
so maybe
option is there.
Yeah, I just, if this is visible to you, I share like this.
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah. So somewhere the slide shows thing is not coming. So I'll continue with this if that's okay with you.
Please continue. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we were talking about this Time magazine cover that has, upset me no end, and I am sure it has upset several people no end. So I was talking to a lawyer friend of mine, and he was, he's a lawyer. Lawyers tend to talk in legalese, and he said, I was telling him, you guys have such difficult language, and we're talking about doctors and the medical legal issues with them. It's so difficult to understand. And he turned back and looked at me and said, Pooja, when doctors speak, nobody can understand. That actually started a thought in my head. So today let's talk about, what is the patient's voice in research? Why should that voice be heard? How can that voice be heard? And where does the Indian patient really stand? So patient's voice in research, we've always said, patient-centered research, patient-centered research. These are new terms that I heard are talking about patient-oriented evidence that matters. And it's a very nice acronym called POEM. Then there's, of course, patient-reported outcomes, which is PROs. There's a lot of qualitative research, which is what some of which, experiences from which Dr. Kavita Singh has actually modified their projects. Then there's dissemination of research, sharing results in a plain language, and training about clinical research. So patients as partners in research can participate in all these sections. Now, why should patients and public voice be heard at all? As Dr. Radha has mentioned, there is a missing reality of real life in real world evidence if we do not engage with the patients themselves. So real world data will fall short of its promise if it does not reflect real lives of real people from different social, economic, and cultural backgrounds. Patient-centered outcomes. So this is an example. This is in a publication talking about how patient-centered outcomes of critical care, what they are and how they should be used. So this is a particular study that actually said that patient-assessed outcomes like quality of life, functional status, health status, physiological parameters, point of care measures, and quality of death are actually different from many of the parameters that are considered by us. So I work a lot with children, and this is a study which is talking about patient-centered outcomes for children with cancer and their caregivers when they seek care in an emergency department. So in an emergency department, the metrics are very different what doctors assess, whereas what actually the patient's caregiver or the patient themselves are worried about. So the important outcomes to children with cancer and their caregivers are distinct from the current quality metrics. So it's very important to understand that while things that we may think are important, unless and until we engage with the person who's going through the process, we may not actually have the same information. So reasons for listening to the patient's voice are, of course, there's a social reason. They are the actual reason why we are doing research, why drugs are being developed. There's a cultural reason. There's a different voice, like Madam Kavita said, that in a cultural setting, it's a totally different setting. It's a different kind of conversation, and therefore listening there is a different listening. There's ethical reasons, which Sir has spoken about, and practical reasons, which Dr. Rangarajan spoke about, actually talking about, decreasing the number of dropouts, increasing retention. And of course, representing real world truly, which is, representing diversity and inclusion. Now, interesting part is how can it be done? So we understand it's needed to be done, and how can it be done? Now, core to any participation of any partnership is trust, inclusion, and respect for the partner. Many times, as a clinician, I feel in India, the patient is considered at a different level from what the patient, the doctor is at. So it's very important that this gap be decreased, that this respect, this integrity, this inclusion be added on. Now, how to go about it is, first, I believe that, opportunities, support systems, and partnerships need to be created. Now, how can supports be created? Many times, if I am a clinician, I don't understand law, I don't understand finance, so I need to learn about those. Similarly, the patients may not exactly understand about research. It can be trained. So can we do human subjects training? Can we explain to them regulation and how research methods are, instead of expecting them to understand randomization and how, flipping of a coin means randomization? What's the next step is possibly giving them opportunities to participate in focus groups, to participate in ethics committees, to participate in panels, present themselves in the media, their own opinions, and then perhaps at a next level, we create a partnership which could include patients as a partner in a research team to actually develop protocols, research advisory groups, and several stakeholder panels. So several attempts have been made, and I will just go through an effort that we are trying to do in our corner of India. So patient-oriented evidence that matters, patient-reported outcomes, and qualitative research. Now, this is a group in the US, the PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, and they're doing some really good work. They've said that patients or caregivers who participated as equal partners in research teams throughout the research process are actually, they are 100% partners in research. So it's not just participating in the clinical trial, but they're actually partners in creating an organization structure, creating a protocol. So through more formal processes. And as we go through the presentation, I will show you that we have tried to do the same in India. It is very, very feasible and very possible. And more informal processes, such as generally, engaging with researchers and clinicians, changing the perception of research, creating, empathy maps, dissemination of research is, I think, a very, very important thing. We all know about readability indices. We've learned about English readability indices like SMOG and Frisch-Kincaid score systems. But in Hindi, there are no readability indices as of now. So when you talk about communication, if you do not have a layperson communication in language, how will that communication really happen? So how can patients really participate? Can they participate in protocol definition? Yes. So as a patient advisory group board member, in focus groups, or through individual surveys, they provide their inputs through inclusion and exclusion criteria. They can provide, if there are children protocols, there are family groups can participate in them. They can provide inputs on whether blood tests and volumes are right. They can provide definitely inputs on what will be the interest of outcomes of interest. Consent form review, and this is something we just recently finished. It's a very, very important part of the whole. I think it should be the first part of any clinical research engagement with the public or the patient, is actually looking at the review of the consent form, creating a consent form in plain language that is readable, providing the correct statements that there is research and not clinical treatment. This is something that confuses the patient no end. This is something when we say it in one single line, it's not clear to them. It should be also mentioning for whom this health research.
Hello, ma'am. Sorry, there's some network connection problem.
Yeah. Hello.
We lost you for a couple of seconds.
Okay. Am I back now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I guess we'll just continue from here. So compensation, when we spoke about compensation at a workshop for patient advocates, it was a very, very interesting conversation, and I will come to that as well when we get there. So I'm going to skip these. Participation in process for selection of participants, what should be the representativeness, how they should be identified, maximizing adherence on protocols, enrollment methods, ensuring how unbiased and systemic data collection is done from all participants. They can participate in dissemination, making results publicly available. Studies, objectives, and results should be presented in lay language summaries, indicating clinical implications, working with patients or organizations to report results in a more understandable manner. Now, it's very interesting that I have worked over 10 years with several patient advocacy groups, and I've realized that it's very difficult for doctors to actually share acknowledgement or authorship with PAG groups and to actually consider them as authors. So it's a very big discussion that we are doing now and driving that PAG groups can be authors as per the ICJME guidelines, and they should actually be engaged in an equivalent manner. So looking at, the JAMA, actually now looking at the guidelines that have come out, the patient-reported outcomes in cancer clinical trials, there is a draft guidance. So patient-reported outcomes is a very important part. The Equator Network now actually defines the guidelines for inclusion of PROs in clinical trial protocols called the Spirit Pro extension. Please do have a look at it. If we look at some publications that have come out from India, so there was an effort around 10 years back in 2014, 2013 to look at a public partnership called Partake. This was a multi-stakeholder effort, and this included how clinical research concerns should be taken in India. It included a survey. There have been publications about emerging role of patient reported outcomes in clinical trials in India. The survey that I spoke about, Partake, was published. Since those 10 years, we've been engaging with several patient advocacy groups, and one that I may, bring to your attention is CAN Kids. This is a pediatric cancer support group. They have actually managed over years to create an entity called CSIR-CDRI among themselves. That's Quality Control and Research Initiatives. In 10 years, they have established an institutional ethics committee. Not only are they participating in clinical research as patients, they're actually sponsors of clinical research, they are sponsors of clinical trials, and they're actually trying to do their own. So they've created a whole core team of clinical research. Interesting conversation started with COVID. Of course, clinical research came into drawing room discussion with Arnab Goswami asking, questions on vaccine efficacy and effectiveness. This changed perception. So we did a survey in 2014, and we repeated this survey on patient awareness in 2021, 22, and it was an interesting look. So there's exciting results coming out of this survey. This has, interestingly, groups from colleges and institutes, which include arts groups, social sciences groups, paramedical groups, and patient advocacy groups. So talking about how research is now understood by them. A small effort also is created just recently called the Patient Advocates for Clinical Research Education and Regulatory Framework, and we conducted our first workshop with 50 plus patient advocates representing 20 patient advocacy groups attending this workshop. And here we focused on understanding of clinical research as an overview and focusing on consent. As I previously mentioned to you, there was a question on insurance that was really discussed during consent discussion with these groups, which I had never, in my 20 plus years of clinical research considered. They actually asked if a person would receive compensation. In that case, would his own life insurance be revoked? Would he not get life insurance if he participated in a clinical trial and something went wrong? Surely he would receive compensation, but would he also receive his life insurance? So this was a question which I had never thought about, and it was interesting to see that patient advocates are very, very vigilant, and it's important to engage with them. We've also started, thank you so much for that. I will minimize this now. Yeah, so over time, working with CAN Kids, I've realized that, not only are they participating, they are supporting, and they are engaging positively. So it's a group of people, and this year we've spoken with, rheumatology groups, we've talked about diabetes groups, kidney disease groups. We actually created a real world evidence workshop in which we put 5 people in a working group on a table, one of which was a patient advocate. So it was interesting to see the research questions that came out from a doctor and a patient advocate sitting together. They were very different from what you will expect. So we look forward to actually publishing this work soon and hoping to get some great inputs from the rest of the group there. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am, for educating us on importance of patient point of view in clinical research and patient partnership with researchers. And I apologize for earlier connection issues. Now it's time to felicitate our speakers. Let's invite Director CDRI and Dr. Sharat Sharma to please come on stage. I request Dr. Kavita Singh to please come on stage. Her commitment is to ensure India's leadership in drug development and manufacturing.
Just thank you. Pooja, I'm taking the opportunity to thank you also, while I let Dr. Radha also do that. But just to let you know, we had so many students hearing you. So thank you so much for that lovely conversation, and see you in Delhi sometime. Pooja, you're on mute.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Kavita ji. And hi to all the students, please.
And thanks from my side as well, Dr. Pooja. It was it was really, really enlightening to listen to you. It resonated a lot with, with some of the issues and topics that I've been thinking about, and others in clinical research definitely are. I think the more attention we pay to this, the more likely it is that we will have, actually better outcomes, meaning that, we'll actually be more efficient in answering research questions. So my thanks. I wish you had been here with us. Maybe there'll be another opportunity in the future, and you can visit us at CDRI at some point.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Ma'am, kindly stay for 2 more minutes. It's time to honor Dr. J.S. Srivastav, who had been in CDR. Ma'am, please be seated. Who had been in CDRI for 29 years and active member of clinical and experimental medicine. Now I request Ms. Manisha Sharma, Regional Communications Manager, DNDi, to collect token of appreciation on behalf of Dr. Pooja Sharma.
Thank you, ma'am.
I invite Dr. Kavita Singh to felicitate Dr. Radha Rangarajan. May I please request Ms. Manisha to give token of appreciation to Dr. Sharad. Thank you all. Now I request organizer of this symposium, Dr. Sharad Sharma, to say vote of thanks.
Good afternoon. It is a privilege for me to propose vote of thanks to all those who have been directly or indirectly involved with this symposium. First up, I would like to thank the speakers of the event, Dr. Radha Rangarajan, Dr. Kavita Singh, Dr. J.S. Srivastav, and Dr. Pooja Sharma for sharing their insightful thoughts with us. Thanks to all of them for accepting our request and sparing their valuable time for today's events. Thanks are also due to the DNDi team, especially Ms. Manisha Sharma, was always in constant touch with us and helped us in finalizing the agenda and with other various activities. Our core team at CDRI, including Dr. Rath, Dr. Amir, Dr. Anand Kulkarni, Dr. Sanjeev Yadav, Engineer Santosh, Dr. Bhavna George, Mr. Ravindranath, Mr. Arvind Kumar, and Shruti and their respective teams put in a lot of hard work towards the conduct of this program. A big thank you to all of them. Hearty thanks to our director, Dr. Radha Ranjan, for her guidance and time and opportunity to organize this event. Last but not the least, thanks are due to each of you who are present here for making this occasion a successful one. Thank you.
Thank you all. I request all of you to please rise for national anthem.